Hey everybody, it's Wojo. Welcome back to another algebra video. Today we are going to take a look at something called the quadratic formula. It can be a little intimidating at first, but I hope that this will work as a good introduction to the quadratic formula. The quadratic formula is shown below. It's x equals negative b plus or minus square root b squared minus 4ac, all divided by 2a. The quadratic formula is a way that we can solve any type of quadratic. And so it becomes very, very helpful. We don't have to worry necessarily about factoring or taking square roots if we understand how to use the quadratic formula. Now, normally we would try to work this formula out by hand, but since everything's a little different right now, I'm going to show you how you could use an online calculator to solve any type of quadratic in case you ran into one. We're going to start today with the example of x squared minus 5x minus 14 equals 0, and it's going to ask us to solve. Now, I want to remind you that when you solve, you're trying to find the x values that we could plug in for x that would make this equation true. So something times itself minus 5 times that something minus 14 would give me 0 for an answer. And I also want to remind you that because this is an x squared, we expect up to 2 solutions. So when we're done, we shouldn't just have x equals one answer. We should have x equals 2 different answers. What we're going to look at today is how to use this formula. Now, when you look at this formula, there's letters in it, lots of letters. There's the 4 and the 2 are the numbers, but there's an A value, a B value, and a C value. Our goal today is just to identify how do we tell what our A values, B values, and C values are in order to use this formula. Now there is one small trick, otherwise it's pretty straightforward. The one small trick is this A, B, and C value we can recognize as long as our equation is set equal to 0. So the equation must, I'll kind of underline that, must be equal to 0 before we start. If it's not equal to 0, we'll do some easy algebra manipulation and make it equal to 0. But as long as it's equal to 0, this is pretty straightforward. Now, our equation is equal to 0, so this is how you identify the A, B, and C values. The A value in this is a number, so there's going to be a number we put in there, is the number in front of the x squared or quadratic term. Now in this case, there's not a number in front of x squared, so I just want to remind you, if there's not a coefficient in front or a number, that's just the number 1. So our A value is 1. And we just keep working our way as long as these are in highest power to lowest power. The term in front of the x is the B value. So this looks like a 5, but don't forget it's a minus 5, so we're going to see that as a negative 5. So our B value is negative 5, and you could probably guess what our C value is. That's our constant all by itself, and that's going to be negative 14. And so now we have an A, B, and C value that we could plug into this formula. Now normally we would take this formula x equals, and everywhere I saw a B, I would plug in a negative 5. Everywhere I saw an A, I would plug in the number 1. And everywhere I see a C, I'd plug in the negative 14. That's just how formulas work. You just plug in the numbers. So I'd get x equals negative b, well negative of negative 5 is positive 5, plus or minus the square root symbol, b squared, well in this case my b is negative 5, so it would be negative 5 squared, minus 4 times my a value times my c value. I'll just use parentheses for multiplication, all divided by 2 times my a value. So my a value is 1, so 2 times 1. And I would then just take all of this, plug it into a calculator, and it would shoot me out some answers. Because there's a plus and minus in here, it's going to shoot out 2 different answers. And so normally, if we were in class, we would work on how to type this into our calculator. Today, I'm just going to link up an online quadratic formula calculator that just requires you to know how to find A, B, and C. So just as a reminder, A is the number in front of the x squared. B is the number in front of the x term, and C is the constant all by itself. Pay attention to signs, but the equation must be equal to 0. And we'll look at an example next where it's not. Once you get your A, B, and C, you can just link yourself to the online calculator that I have. It's Quadratic Formula Calculator. It's going to ask you to type in your A value, your B value, and your C value. I've already done that, and then you just hit calculate. Now when you hit calculate, it's going to do all that math that we would have normally done on our calculator. It's going to type in all the numbers just like I did. It's going to do the negative 5 squared minus 4ac, get the 81. It's going to do some other math, but in the end, it's going to tell you the 2 answers. our two answers are either equal 7 or -2. So those are the two answers I was looking for, 7 or -2. So when I come up here, I know my answers are either x equals 7 or, can't be both, x equals -2. It's one or the other. If I plug in 7, it'll work. If I plug in -2, it'll work. And so once we know our a, b, and c value, then we can just come over here, type those in. You could just change that to whatever a value you want, whatever b value you want, whatever c, hit calculate again, and it'll do any quadratic. And that's the nice thing about the quadratic formula. It works for anything, and it'll be able to do that for you. So what I want to just finish up with today, because it's another short lesson, is what happens if it's not equal to 0? Then how can we identify our a, b, and c? So let's take a look at, let me move this paper out of the way too. Let's take a look at an example where it's not equal to 0. So our second and last example today is going to stay solve again. Remember, solve means find the x values that make it true. 8x squared plus 4x minus 16 equals negative x squared. Sorry, it's a negative x squared. And so it might be really, really easy to look at this and say, well, a is 8, b is 4, c is -16, plug it in your calculator and you're done. The problem is this equation is not equal to 0. And if it's not equal to 0, then we can't just grab our a's, b's, and c's. Our first step is we got to make it equal to 0. On the right-hand side, this doesn't equal 0. It equals a negative x squared. I know my handwriting's terrible. My apologies. But if that's a negative x squared and I want it to be 0, I need to get rid of that negative x squared. So in algebra, how do we get rid of a minus anything or a negative x squared? To get rid of it, we're just going to add it. So if I added x squared to this side, what is negative x squared plus a positive x squared? Well, that would just give me 0, which is good because I can use the quadratic formula once this is equal to 0. But if I add x squared to this side, then I'm going to have to add x squared somewhere else on this side to keep it fair. Now, I'm not going to add it to the -16 because that's not a like term. I'm not going to add it to the 4x. I'm going to add it to the 8x squared. Now, as a reminder, if there's no number in front, we consider it 1. So now I have on this side 8x squared plus 1x squared, which gives me 9x squared. I still have the 4x, and I still have the -16. That equals 0. Now I can identify my a's, b's, and c's. So my a value now, my b value now, and my c value that I'm going to type into my online calculator, I can grab right from the equation. A is 9. A is always the number in front of the x squared. B is a positive 4. And c is a -16. Just watch your signs. That's a -16, so our c value is going to be a -16. And so if our equation's not equal to 0, we just make it equal to 0. Sometimes we have to move over an x squared. Sometimes we're going to have to move over a constant. It just depends. But then I'm going to take that a, b, and c value, type it into that online calculator, and it's going to do the math for me. Again, in class, we would do that by hand, but we're not in class, and you guys might not all have calculators, so this is going to be the best way we can go. I guess just to finish up, just to make sure that last point made sense, if I gave you this equation, if you guys could just see if you could guess what the a, b, and c value are, just as a quick test before we leave today. If I said, what's the a value? What's the b value? What's the c value? Do you think you can tell just by looking at it what the a, b, and c is? Sometimes you can tell just by looking. Some students might have to do some work. If you said the a value is 4, you would have been correct. A value is number in front of the x squared. If you said the b value is 8, you would have also been correct. If you said the c value was 7, though, you would have been wrong. And if you take a look at it, hopefully you'll see why you would have been wrong. Because when you look at this equation, what do we notice? It's not equal to 0. And because it's not equal to 0, there's some work we have to do to get it equal to 0. We're going to have to get rid of this positive 4. So how do we get rid of this positive 4? Well, to get rid of a positive 4, we're going to subtract it. That's going to give me 0 now, which is good. But whatever I do to this side, I have to do to this side. And so what is 7 minus 4? 7 minus 4 is 3, so technically my C value is 3. So just be careful that you don't get tricked and put in the wrong values of A, B, and C. The online calculator relies on the fact that you're going to get this set equal to 0 before you start. That's the major sticking point of the quadratic formula. After that, it's just all computation. Whether you use a calculator or an online calculator, you'll be able to solve it. But yep, you would just type in what you want. A value of 4, B value of 8, and a C value of 3. And if you typed it in the online calculator, I just did there, A value of 4, B value of 8, and C value of 3, and hit calculate, it's going to go ahead and tell you your answer. So it just automatically changes it, and it looks like it gave us an answer of negative 0.5 and a negative 1.5. So then we could just go back to our paper and just write, we know our two solutions are negative 0.5 or negative 1.5. So hopefully this made some sense. If not, just let us know. We'll be more than happy to help you out. There is going to be some review on our check-in this week. We don't want you forgetting anything. So if you do have questions, stop by and see us. Email us. We'll be more than happy to help you out. And, otherwise, just have a great week, and we'll talk to you next week.